Check.
Just want to shake your hand.
Hi.
We've been praying a lot.
Oh, thanks. Check, check. You're not going to have any problem with these being close like this? We're just getting the mic squared away. We're not starting. What's that? Is good? Check, check. Is this one on too? Check, check, check.
That was on right now. I'm going to mute that when you come up because you'll have this wireless on you.
Okay.
So that way there's no feedback.
Do we want to
Test this real quick.
oops. Let me close all of this out. Do you want me to plug this in?
If you would like. His came up, so it should be working. I'd be surprised if it's not working. And it'll take a second too.
Well, let me pull up on PowerPoint. I'll be shocked if this works because nothing ever works.
Testing, check, 1, 2, 3, check. Is that good? Can you hear us, Scott? Yeah. Check, 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3, check.
Checking mic 4, check. All right.
I'm not sure I'll need it, but I'd rather not need it and have it than need it and not have it. Where should I run it from? Right here?
Yes.
I guess I can kind of wind it around here so we don't run it.
Or I could bring it around the other side of the podium.
That works too.
Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. The Quran declares in Surah An-Nisa, "And for their saying, indeed we have killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. They did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but another was made to resemble him to them. And indeed those who differ over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following of assumption. And they did not kill him for certain. Rather, Allah raised him to himself." A few weeks from now, Christians around the world will observe Holy Week and Easter, commemorating Jesus' death and celebrating his resurrection. These reputed events and their significance for humanity are at the very heart of historic Christianity. However, Muslims have a very different understanding of the final events of Jesus' time on earth. Tonight you will hear arguments for each of these two perspectives. My name is Amos Crew, and I'm the student president of Ratio Christi at George Mason University. Ratio Christi is Latin for the reason of Christ, and our mission is to equip Christian students and faculty with historical, philosophical, and scientific reasons for their beliefs, to offer skeptics answers to their objections, and to host public events such as this one, featuring Christian intellectuals in lectures and debates. We meet every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. in the Hub VIP Room 2. Dinner is always served, and the format varies between open discussions, lectures, and video screenings. We are honored to co-host this event with Mason Crew. Crew is a multi-ethnic and caring community devoted to connecting college students and faculty to Jesus Christ. Crew's weekly meeting is on Thursday night in the Hub Ballroom at 8 p.m. You can learn about who they are and what they do at masoncrew.com. You can find out more about Ratio Christi and Crew at the tables in the lobby. The Muslim Student Association and Access Islam also have an information table there, and I'm grateful to my friends in those two student clubs for helping advertise this event among the Muslim student community. I would like to thank the many people and organizations who helped make this event possible, including Reston Bible Church, Life Community Church Alexandria, Nathaniel Sears, Justin Exner with Fairway Independent Mortgage, John Enlick with Christian Businessmen's Association, and other individual contributors and volunteers, including the InterVarsity volunteers here tonight. I also want to thank Will Gaines, Derek Neal, my Ratio Christi Chapter Director Robin Lopez and Associate Chapter Director Ryan McAllister, and Brett Miller from Crew for their roles in organizing this event. Finally, I especially want to thank the debaters, Dr. Shabir Ali and Dr. David Wood, and our moderator for tonight, Scott Tomlinson. Scott is a strategic thinker for the U.S. Department of Defense. He is a member of the Evangelical Philosophical Society, the Society of Christian Philosophers, and the Association for Symbolic Logic. He has presented papers at the national level on a modal ontological argument for the necessity of the Trinity, and has work under review for publication that provides a mathematical proof against the currently popular simulation hypothesis. He has written on solutions to the probabilistic problem of evil, critiques of special relativity, arguments against Platonism, the fundamental reality of space and time, as well as a Leibnizian criticism of Euclidean geometry and modern set theory. Scott leads a discussion forum that is held live weekly at Reston Bible Church on Sundays at 9 a.m. and can be found online at solidground.restonbible.org. Please welcome Mr. Scott Tomlinson.
Well, good evening. Our debate topic for tonight is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Christian and Muslim perspectives. I think we are honored and in for a treat for our two debaters that we have here tonight. A weakness that's often seen in debates is that one side or the other understands their own position very well, but doesn't necessarily understand in any complete sense the other individual's position. That is not the case, I can tell you, with the debaters tonight. Each of them are expert not only in their own areas of knowledge, but have deep understanding and knowledge of the oppositional view. So I think that this has the likelihood to be an absolutely outstanding debate, and I think it's probably safe to say that on this particular topic, between Christianity and Islam, you are looking at probably the two lead debaters in the English-speaking world, possibly the entire world, on this subject. So it's a terrific debate to attend, and I'm honored to be here and moderating it. Brief introduction, probably not necessary for the folks here, but Dr. Shabir Ali holds a BA in Religious Studies from Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario, with a specialization in biblical literature. He also holds an MA and PhD from the University of Toronto with a specialization in Quranic exegesis. He is the president of the Islamic Information and Dawah Center International in Toronto, where he functions as an imam, and he travels internationally to represent Islam in public lectures and interfaith dialogues. He explains Islam in a weekly television program called Let the Quran Speak, and past episodes of this show can be seen online at www.quranspeaks.com. Our other debater, Dr. David Wood, is a member of the Society of Christian Philosophers, the Evangelical Philosophical Society, and the Hume Society. He's a former atheist and became a Christian after examining the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. He's a contributor to the books Evidence for God, 50 Arguments for Faith from the Bible, History, Philosophy, and Science, Defending the Resurrection, and True Reason, Christian Responses to the Challenge of Atheism. David has been in more than 50 moderated debates, and he lives in the Bronx with his wife Marie and his 4 sons, Lucien, Blaze, Reed, and Paley. So welcome our two debaters for this evening, if you would. Our debate time frame and format is relatively straightforward. We'll have 2 20-minute opening statements, 2 12-minute first rebuttals, 2 8-minute second rebuttals. Then there will be a 20-minute long crossfire of 2 minutes for each individual who have time, can take that time as they wish, but it's basically an interactive back and forth, and always an exciting time between these two debaters. And then we will have a 5-minute concluding statement from each debater, and that'll be followed by an audience Q&A. There are 2 microphones set up on the left and on the right, audience right and left. Any questions that are intended for Dr. David Wood to answer, please come to this microphone. Any questions intended for Dr. Shabir Ali, please come to this microphone. As you are listening to the debate and formulating your questions, a word of warning, questions from the floor will only be asked in 30 seconds or less. If you exceed 30 seconds, I will cut you off and we'll go to the gentleman or lady behind you. So you got to hit that 30-second mark. And if there are, we'll have a few announcements at the end of the debate. But without any further ado, let's please welcome our first debater to the podium.
Good evening. I'd like to thank Ratio Christi and Reston Bible Church for arranging this debate. and George Mason University for hosting. Hubert Humphrey said that freedom is hammered out on the anvil of discussion, dissent, and debate. Believe it or not, there are places in this world where it might not be safe for Christians and Muslims to gather for an event like this. Places where challenging the dominant ideology could be met with violence. Places where freedom is stamped out, not hammered out. I'm referring, of course, to college campuses. College is a magical place where young people who know absolutely nothing about anything nevertheless conclude that they're ready to solve all of the biggest problems that confront mankind, or people-kind, for those of you watching the live stream in Canada. If you meet one of these young activists, probably named Chad, he'll say, "Yeah, I haven't learned any facts whatsoever about climate change or the national debt or how laws get passed, but by golly, I can fix it all." Really? How are you going to do that, Chad? I'll do it by teaming up with a bunch of other kids who don't know anything, and together we'll scream at anyone who disagrees with us. I do not envy the depression that will set in when Chad eventually figures out that this was the stupidest strategy for improving society that anyone has ever come up with, but I admire his audacity. Old people, unlike young people, know things. Unfortunately, they often lose their desire to take to the streets and challenge opposing positions, mainly because they're too busy having jobs and paying taxes. But college students, as clueless as they are, have no jobs, so they can spend all day fighting the power and ignoring their homework. To these daring young revolutionaries, I say this: since you're interested in huge topics, why not start with the resurrection of Jesus? Jesus rose from the dead. That is bigger than the environment, bigger than the economy, bigger than politics. And as you examine the evidence for the resurrection, you may even conclude that you've just stumbled upon the solution to the biggest problem in the universe: death. I'd also like to thank my friend Shabir for representing Islam tonight. This is my 8th debate with Shabir. And after all these years of debating, he's still trying to copy my beard. Give it time, Shabir, give it time. The question before us is, did Jesus rise from the dead? Now you may be wondering, how in the name of common sense are we going to answer a question about something that happened nearly 2,000 years ago in a completely different part of the world, in an ancient culture, especially when it involves a miracle? But don't worry, I'm a philosopher. Philosophers specialize in formulating sophisticated arguments using deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, abductive reasoning, the probability calculus, and Bayesian confirmation theory. Our arguments may be confusing to non-philosophers, but I find that if I just lay out my case in all its convoluted philosophical glory and then walk people through it step by step, they slowly catch on. So try wrapping your minds around this argument. Jesus died. He was alive again later, so he rose from the dead. I see you're all confused. Hopefully it will start to make more sense as we go through the evidence. There are plenty of barely literate internet skeptics who think that we can't know anything about Jesus of Nazareth, but even some of the most critical historical Jesus scholars will acknowledge certain facts about Jesus: that he was baptized by John the Baptist, that he had disciples, that he was known as a miracle worker and an exorcist, that he believed he played a crucial role in the coming of the kingdom of God, and of course that he died by crucifixion. The scholarly consensus on Jesus' death arises from, one, having a variety of ancient sources reporting that Jesus was crucified, and two, knowing how crucifixion works. We have Christian, Jewish, and Roman sources reporting Jesus' execution: 4 Gospels, the letters of Paul, Clement of Rome, Polycarp, Josephus, Tacitus, Marabar Serapion, Lucian of Samosata, and so on. And our understanding of Roman crucifixion rules out any speculations about Jesus surviving his execution. Today we tend to think of crucifixion as just nailing someone to a cross, but Roman crucifixion was a three-step process. The first step was the scourging, which was sometimes called the half-death, because victims would be half dead by the time it was finished. The Romans used a flagrum made of leather thongs with chunks of bone or metal woven into the strands, designed to remove human flesh. We have records of people being beaten until their veins and arteries were exposed, until their bones were showing, or until their intestines spilled out. And that was just the beginning. Step 2 was nailing the victim to a cross and letting him hang there while the blood drained out of him. Once he stopped gasping for breath, the Romans knew that their work was done. Almost. There was still the matter of what to do with the body. Generally, the Romans would leave a corpse on the cross and let it rot or be torn apart by wild jackals and birds. But if they needed to pry someone off a cross, they would stab him through the heart with a sword or a spear just to make sure he was dead. Not the sort of process anyone's going to walk away from. So Jesus' death isn't simply a point of Christian doctrine. It's a fact of history, as even non-Christian scholars are happy to admit. Atheist New Testament scholar Gerd Ludemann declares that Jesus' death as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. John Dominic Crossan of the infamous Jesus Seminar says that there is not the slightest doubt about the fact of Jesus' crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. Marcus Borg, another member of the Jesus Seminar, states that Jesus' execution is the most certain fact about the historical Jesus. Jewish scholar Pinchas Lapid concludes that Jesus' death by crucifixion is historically certain. According to Paula Fredrickson, a convert to Judaism, the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pilate on or around Passover in the manner Rome reserved particularly for political insurrectionists, namely crucifixion. Bart Ehrman maintains one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. Intriguingly, some Muslims are even starting to acknowledge the facts here. Reza Aslan is a Muslim who authored a book on the historical Jesus. In an interview, Aslan affirmed, Islam doesn't believe that Jesus was crucified. Jesus was most definitely crucified. Amen to that, Brother Aslan. Notice that these non-Christian scholars and writers aren't simply saying that we have some evidence that Jesus died by crucifixion. They're saying that it's indisputable, that it's historically certain, that it's one of the most certain facts of history. We can only conclude that any worldview that denies Jesus' death by crucifixion is simply out of touch with reality. So Jesus died, and we know that he died, but according to his early followers, he didn't stay dead. He rose from the dead and appeared to them on numerous occasions. Now, that's what the first generation of Christians claimed. But how can we know that Jesus was alive at some point following his execution? Well, the same way we know many other things from history. We need witnesses, and we need to know that we can trust these witnesses. Do we have witnesses of the risen Jesus? Lots. Fortunately, they began preaching almost immediately, and we have summaries of some of their early sermons. They issued official creedal statements that could be easily memorized and passed on to others. They sent out representatives with authoritative traditions that would eventually be incorporated into the Gospels and other writings. We also have writings and quotations from outside the New Testament from the next generation of Christian leaders, which included people like Clement of Rome and Polycarp, who knew one or more of the apostles and who continued preaching the message of the apostles, especially the resurrection of Jesus. But the most interesting source on the eyewitnesses of the risen Jesus is an early Christian creed recorded in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7. 1 Corinthians was written around AD 55, and Paul says in the letter that he delivered the creed to the church in Corinth when he visited them, which would have been in AD 51. But Paul had received the creed long before that, either when he visited the apostles in Jerusalem or perhaps even at his conversion, and scholars date its formulation to within a few years of Jesus' crucifixion. James D.G. Dunn, this tradition, we can be entirely confident, was formulated as tradition within months of Jesus' death. According to Michael Goulder, Paul received the tradition, that is, he was taught it at his conversion, perhaps 2 years after Jesus' death. Ulrich Wilkins says that the creed indubitably goes back to the oldest phase of all in the history of primitive Christianity. Gerrit Ludemann maintains that the elements of the tradition are to be dated to the first 2 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. So there's widespread agreement from scholars across the theological spectrum that 1 Corinthians 15 is very early material that can be traced back to Jesus' original disciples shortly after his death. Let's read the passage. Paul writes, "For I delivered to you, the Christians of Corinth, as of first importance," this is foundational information, "what I also received," and here's where the creed that Paul received begins, "that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," that's Peter, "then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time." Paul is writing this years later, so he adds parenthetically, "most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles." The original would have ended with this appearance to all the apostles, but Jesus appeared to Paul later, so Paul adds, "and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared to me also." Notice what we have here. We have Jesus' death for sins, his burial, his resurrection on the third day, and numerous appearances, and we have all of it as authoritative tradition within a few years, if not within months, of the crucifixion. As for the appearances, there are appearances to individuals, James, the brother of Jesus, Peter, and eventually Paul, to small groups, the 12 and all the apostles, and to a large group. He appeared to more than 500 at one time. The list also reports appearances to both friends and foes. Peter and the apostles were followers of Jesus during his 3-year ministry, but James and Paul weren't. James didn't believe in his brother when Jesus was preaching in Galilee and Judea, and Paul persecuted the church and tried to destroy it. Yet they're all listed as witnesses who saw Jesus alive again sometime after his death. This passage eliminates two skeptical responses to Jesus' resurrection, the legend hypothesis and the hallucination hypothesis. At the internet level, there are still people who claim that belief in Jesus' resurrection came about over a period of legendary development over several decades, but this is factually false. We know what the earliest Christian preaching was, and this goes back to the very beginning. You also may have heard people argue that Jesus' disciples simply hallucinated the resurrection appearances. But a hallucination, by definition, is something that occurs in the mind of the person who's seeing it. Since Jesus appeared to entire groups on multiple occasions, hallucinations just can't explain the appearances. So we can't attribute the resurrection appearances to legend or to hallucinations. Can we attribute them to deception? Were the disciples lying about the appearances? That's what I thought before I was a Christian, but there's a fatal flaw in the deception hypothesis. Liars make poor martyrs. Some human beings will die for what they believe in. I've never met anyone who's willing to die for something he made up. In the book of Acts, chapter 4, Peter and John are arrested and threatened. In Acts 5, the apostles are put in jail and flogged. In Acts 12, James, the brother of John, is put to death by Herod, and Peter is again put in jail. The apostle Paul describes his life as a Christian in 2 Corinthians 11, 24 to 27. He writes, "5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I've been on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I've been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Become an apostle. It's a great life. Jewish historian Josephus reports that James, the brother of Jesus, was stoned to death as a lawbreaker. Clement of Rome invites his readers to keep in mind the sufferings and martyrdoms of Peter and Paul. So the apostles didn't just preach that they had seen Jesus alive again, they were willing to endure prison, floggings, and death as they preached, and that means they really believed what they were saying. Here again, it's not just Christians who draw this conclusion. Even non-Christians maintain that the disciples sincerely believed that they had seen the risen Jesus. Gerrit Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. Bart Ehrman, we can say with complete certainty that some of his disciples at some later time insisted that he soon appeared to them, convincing them that he had been raised from the dead. Paula Fredrickson, I know in their own terms what they saw was the raised Jesus. I'm not saying that they really did see the raised Jesus. I wasn't there. I don't know what they saw. But I do know, as a historian, that they must have seen something. Fredrickson says she doesn't know what they saw. But I do. They saw the sort of thing that would convince individuals and groups, friends and foes, that they had all seen a man who had once been dead standing before them. And I've never seen an explanation that accounts for this apart from the resurrection. That's the Christian perspective, but this debate is about Christian and Muslim perspectives, so I'll briefly address the most common Muslim account of what happened to Jesus. According to the traditional Muslim position, Jesus went around telling people to believe in God and in the Torah, and for some reason this upset the Jews so much that they decided to kill him. But God had a plan. God took Jesus out of this world into heaven and disguised someone else to make him look like Jesus. And this other person was crucified. This is called substitution theory, the belief that Jesus was replaced by a substitute. There are numerous problems with this theory. Let's consider 4. First, substitution theory portrays Allah as a malicious deceiver. If Jesus didn't actually die, but Allah made people think that Jesus died, the real reason billions of people are now convinced that Jesus died by crucifixion is that Allah did an amazing job tricking everyone. Second, the Islamic view portrays Jesus as a failure. The Jesus of the Quran spent years preaching Islam, only to have his life's work sabotaged by Allah, who convinced the world that Jesus died by crucifixion, ultimately giving rise to Christianity. According to the Quran, Jesus' followers were devout Muslims, but they must have disappeared rather quickly, without so much as a whimper, because we have no records that they even existed. So the Islamic Jesus couldn't win a single lasting convert, and he accomplished absolutely nothing of any lasting significance. Third, Surah 61, verse 14 of the Quran claims that Allah aided the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost over those who rejected Jesus. But the followers of Jesus, who became uppermost over those who opposed Jesus, were Christians who proclaimed Jesus' death and resurrection. If Jesus didn't die and rise from the dead, then the Quran is false. Fourth, Surah 7, verse 157 of the Quran says that Christians were still reading the gospel during the time of Muhammad, and Surah 5, verse 47 of the Quran commands Christians to judge by the gospel. Since we know that the gospel, read by Christians in the 7th century, affirmed Jesus' death and resurrection, Muslims are contradicting the Quran when they say that Jesus didn't die or rise from the dead. So the Islamic view not only flies in the face of history and scholarship, but also insults God, insults Jesus, and contradicts the Quran. The Christian view, by contrast, honors God, honors Jesus, and is thoroughly grounded in historical facts and careful scholarship. If we agree with David Hume that a wise man proportions his belief to the evidence, we should all confess that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, just as he said he would.